All righty. Thanks for everybody who joined. On behalf of Florida Department of Health and Volusia County, welcome to the 2021 Path for Hope Virtual Summit. My name is Jordan Hawley. I'll be facilitating this session. You've joined the session titled Breaking the Barriers of Stigma. All participants will be muted during this session. There will be a question and answer time at the end of the session for you to pose any questions. You may raise your hand using the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. We'll then call on you and allow you to unmute yourself. You may also submit any questions during the presentation in the chat box, and we'll pose them to the presenter at the end of the session if time allows. If you have requested any CEUs for this session, please indicate your presence by responding to the pop-up poll that will happen mid-session. Thank you to the Path for Hope Summit Planning Committee partners, Advent Health, Community Coalition Alliance, One Voice for Volusia, SMA Healthcare, and the Volusia Recovery Alliance. It is my pleasure to introduce your presenter, Karen Schreibach, for her presentation.
Good morning, everybody. I am Karen Schreibach. I am a person in long-term recovery of over 38 years, free from substances. I am the executive director of the Volusia Recovery Alliance, a recovery coach professional, a certified recovery peer specialist with the adult designation. And I'm very happy to be here because I'm very passionate about the topic as well as educating people on substance use disorder. So basically, the objectives of this session are to cover key points about the disease of substance use disorder and address stigma as a barrier to recovery, including internal stigma, external stigma, and then we'll talk about recovery resources. Objective 1 is to understand the signs and symptoms of substance use disorder. Objective 2, to learn about the impacts of stigma in substance use disorder. 3, know how language choice can reduce stigma. 4, know what to do if someone has substance use disorder, and then to learn about recovery resources. So there is a very high cost of substance misuse. Illicit drug users are less likely to miss 2 or more days of work in the past month and to have worked for 3 or more employers in the past year. This presents a very big negative impact to a company's bottom line. Drugs in the workplace are not issues that organizations can ignore. More than 75% of individuals with substance use disorders continue to maintain their employment. However, their impact on the workplace often goes undetected, with ill effects usually attributed to other factors. Approximately 50 to 80% of all child abuse and neglect cases substantiated by Child Protective Services include some degree of substance use by the child's parents. Every 25 minutes, an American baby is born addicted to opioids. Prenatal exposure to alcohol, tobacco, and illicit drugs has the potential to cause a wide range of physical and developmental challenges for these babies. And one of the biggest challenges are babies that have been exposed to alcohol in the womb, because it causes fetal alcohol syndrome, which is very detrimental to a child's development. Studies show 1 in 5 people that experience homelessness have had a chronic substance use disorder. And then finally, regarding crime, as many as 60% of adults in federal prisons are there for drug-related crimes. So fatal overdoses have hit a record high in the past from last year. There were over 93,000 drug overdose deaths that occurred in the United States in 2020. This is the highest number of overdose deaths ever recorded in a 12-month period, according to the CDC. Volusia County is similarly impacted with 240 overdose deaths this year, from January 1st through October 5th. And we get these numbers from the Sheriff's Department here in Volusia County. Overdoses are now the leading cause of injury death. Other consequences of substance misuse include incarceration, potential child abuse and neglect, loss of employment, increased treatment admissions, and increased emergency room visits. So basically, the fact that there is an arm of the American Medical Association called the American Society of Addiction Medicine should tell you that this is a brain disease, well, a disease nonetheless. It is a brain disease. So at its core, substance use disorder isn't just a social problem or a moral problem or a criminal problem. It is a brain problem whose behaviors manifest in these other areas. This was said by Dr. Miller, the past president of ASAM. Research shows that substance use disorder affects the brain's reward circuitry, such as memories of previous experiences with food, sex, alcohol, and other drugs, trigger cravings, and more addictive behaviors. Brain circuitry governing impulse control and judgment is also altered in the brains of those with substance use disorder, often resulting in a nonsensical pursuit of rewards such as alcohol and other drugs. Substance use disorder is a chronic, relapsing brain disease characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite harmful consequences. It's a brain disease because drugs change the brain. Drugs change the brain's structure and how it works. These brain changes can be long-lasting and can lead to many harmful self-destructive behaviors. Nearly all addictive drugs, either directly or indirectly, target the brain's reward system by flooding it with dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter present in the regions of the brain that regulate movement, emotion, cognition, motivation, and feelings of pleasure. The overstimulation of this system, which rewards our natural behaviors, produces euphoric effects sought by people who use drugs, and then teaches them to repeat the behavior over and over again. Substance use disorder is characterized in 5 ways. One is the compulsive use. Compulsion means the person does the same thing, the same act over and over again. It's also tied into obsession, which is an unwanted thought over and over again. There will be a loss of control. The person will continue to use drugs despite the consequences of the use. There's also tolerance. Tolerance means that, one pill today will require more pills later as the person uses more and more to get the same effect as that one pill used to have. So that's tolerance. And then withdrawal. Withdrawal is you take away either the drugs or the behavior, you stop the behavior, and the person will experience an adverse effect, either emotionally or physically. So substance use disorder, you can see the behavior, right? But what you don't realize underneath all that behavior and that continued drug use are things like childhood trauma, mental health challenges. Many people self-medicate because their primary mental health issue isn't addressed, like bipolar, for instance. There have been physical, emotional, or sexual abuse in the past. The person has experienced long-term poverty, loneliness. Sometimes you use because you're lonely. Grief and loss is a big reason why a lot of people start using and then continue to cross the line into substance use disorder. And then pain. I'm a person with chronic pain. My chronic pain started as a teenager because I had bad knees, and my orthopedic doctor started to give me pain medicine. And that really launched my substance use disorder. So there's been a lot of research about substance use disorder and trauma. Trauma does change the brain. Trauma influences the brain chemicals and the structure. It influences a person's perspective and views, and trauma influences our behavior. So our bodies are pretty much like machines, and we'll always kind of work towards homeostasis, which is any self-regulating process by which biological systems tend to maintain stability while adjusting to conditions that are optimal for the person's survival. So a lot of the things that happens in the brain is about survival. You know, these things that happen in the brain are pretty much in the area of the brain where it tells you to breathe, where it tells you to eat, where it tells you to drink water, that sort of thing. The body will experience fight, flight, and freeze reactions based on stress or danger. There is the inability to control cortisol release. So those who hold their stress inward, I'm one of those, that worries, has fret, has shame, guilt, and regret, have a higher risk of cancer and autoimmune diseases. And those who let stress out through anger, violence, and screaming have an increased risk of stroke and heart attack. So, you know, our reactions to things can really lead us on a path where we are affected physically. So this slide shows a number of some information about all the different chemicals that our body has. The big one, of course, is dopamine, which dopamine affects feelings of pleasure, movement, and motivation, as I mentioned before. And it is the main neurotransmitter that's very involved in substance use disorder. People will repeat behaviors that lead to dopamine release. So some drugs cause a tremendous dopamine rush. They're the most addictive, like methamphetamine and cocaine causes huge dopamine, you know, releases. The other neurotransmitter that's involved in a lot of, you know, the behavior that we see is serotonin. Serotonin is the new mood neurotransmitter. It contributes to well-being and happiness, helps the sleep cycle and the digestive system regulation. It is affected by exercise and light exposure. It's also a lot of serotonin is produced in the gut. And so people that have, you know, malnutrition, or actually a friend of mine had celiac disease, and he was always malnourished because of his celiac disease. And so he had very low levels of serotonin and was constantly, you know, depressed because of that. He felt a lot of depression over the years. The calming neurotransmitter is GABA, and GABA calms firing nerves in the central nervous system. High levels improve focus, low levels cause anxiety. So many people with substance use disorder have a lot of anxiety. And so it's a mixed bag of the body's reaction with, you know, having all these different hormones and chemicals that affect mental health and substance use disorder. The other one that I want to mention is endorphins. And endorphins are released during exercise, excitement, and sex, producing well-being and euphoria and reduce pain. So it's a little overview of the things that go on in our bodies that do affect mental health and substance use disorder. So on the right, that purple line on the slide is the reward pathway, which that is embedded in the area of memories in the brain, as well as the survival instincts. So when that reward pathway gets triggered, the person actually feels like, oh my God, I must do this. It's a matter of life and death, even though the opposite is true. Using drugs can lead to death, as we know. But the brain tricks the person, or we call it hijacking the brain. They're tricked into thinking that they must use again. And that's why you'll see people over and over again relapse. The continued cravings that happen is because the reward pathway has been stimulated. The reward pathway ends up in the ends in the prefrontal cortex, which is basically the area of the brain for executive function, as they say. It's where we make good decisions. It's where, you know, it's the smart part of our brain, so to speak. And so that's why people that are using drugs often make bad decisions. On the right-hand side of this slide is a controlled brain and a brain on cocaine. And as you can see, this is further proof that this is a brain disease. The brain on the left is someone that hasn't been using drugs. And you can see the areas of red, which is areas of brain activity, are pretty robust in this slide. And then when you introduce cocaine, you can see that those areas of activity actually are diminished. The good thing is that the brain has a thing called neuroplasticity, and the brain is capable of healing. So when you take away the drugs and you start to introduce, you know, good activities that can naturally help raise the dopamine level in the brain, the person's brain starts to heal, but it doesn't happen overnight. It typically takes months for the brain to really start to heal. So it is a chronic disease, substance use disorder, and there is relapse. But what I want to say about it is that substance use disorder actually has less of a relapse rate than things like hypertension and asthma. So typically you'll see a relapse rate in substance use disorder of 40 to 60%. But with hypertension and asthma, you'll see a relapse rate of 50 to 70%. With a type 1 diabetic, that person is likely to relapse with their disease 30 to 50%. So really substance use disorder is kind of, you know, partway through the middle of relapse rates for other chronic illnesses. So the likelihood of sustaining recovery does grow year after year. So between 1 and 12 months of recovery, about a third of the people that have entered the recovery process will sustain it for another year. After 1 to 2 years of recovery, 2/3 will make it another year. After 4 years of recovery, about 86% will make it another year. However, even after 77 years of recovery, about 14% will relapse. However, you know, that's way below the other relapse rates for other chronic diseases. So the longer you're in recovery, the more likely you are to stay in recovery. So what does recovery look like on average? So in the first 12 months, the person will see being involved with more recovering friends, have less illegal activity, typically in incarceration, less homelessness or being affected by violence, and less use of others by others at home and work and by social peers. And then from 1 to 3 years, you'll see a virtual elimination of illegal activity and illegal income. You'll see better housing and living situations. You'll see increasing employment and income. And then 4 years and beyond, you'll see more social and spiritual support, better mental health, housing and living situations continue to improve, dramatic rise in employment and income, and dramatic drop in people living below the poverty line. And one of the great things that we're blessed with at the Volusia Recovery Alliance is a program that is in partnership and contract with Career Source, Flagler, and Volusia called Career Connect, where we can help people in recovery find a new career path. We can also help families that have been impacted by someone else's substance use disorder, or we can help people that want to help others in recovery, in the field of recovery, to gain that type of career path or employment. So now I'm really going to focus on stigma. So stigma in the dictionary is a mark of disgrace or infamy, a stain or reproach on one's reputation. Stigma is a set of negative beliefs that a group or society holds about a topic or a group of people. According to the World Health Organization, stigma is a major cause of discrimination and exclusion, contributing to the abuse of human rights. When a person experiences stigma, they are seen as less than because of a real or perceived health status. Stigma is rarely based on facts, but rather on assumptions, preconceptions, and generalizations. Its negative impact can be prevented or lessened through education. Stigma results in prejudice, avoidance, rejection, and discrimination against people who have a socially undesirable trait or engage in culturally marginalized behaviors such as drug use. Families, friends, and the general public can carry negative feelings about drug use or behavior. They may even use derogatory terms such as junkie, alcoholic, or crackhead. These thoughts and feelings and labels can create and perpetuate stigma. So stigma has the potential to negatively affect a person's self-esteem, damage relationships with loved ones, and prevent those suffering from substance use disorder from accessing treatment. Stigma is a public health issue. Stigma kills. It leads to high death rates, incarceration, mental health concerns among dependent populations. Stigma can be divided into two distinct types. The first one is social stigma, which is characterized by prejudiced and discriminating behavior directed towards individuals with mental health or substance use problems. In contrast, perceived stigma or self-stigma is the internalization by the sufferer of their perceptions of discrimination. Perceived stigma can lead to feelings of shame and poor treatment outcomes. So part of the reason why I am so passionate about stigma education is because I do have my own stigma story. So I was a candidate for recovery at the age of 20. And I was too ashamed to ask for help because I was already a well-respected healthcare professional. And so I didn't ask for help and I used for another 9 years. And hence, destroying opportunities to become a doctor, which was my dream, to improve my life, to pursue my art, my love of creating art, and so forth and so on. And so because I didn't enter recovery back then, I wasted a lot of my time in my life because of my drug use. So we do live in a society where millions of Americans are dependent on drugs or alcohol, and only a small percentage ever receive treatment at a facility. The National Survey on Drug Use and Health found that 19.7 million Americans aged 12 and older battled a substance use disorder. Stigma affects us all. Nearly everyone has felt stigmatized or has stigmatized others at some point in their lives. In a study done by Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, the general public was found to likely have more negative attitudes toward those dealing with drug misuse than those who were dealing with mental illness. Additionally, researchers have found that people generally don't support insurance, housing, and employment policies that benefited people who were dependent on drugs. Stigma negatively impacts a number of areas, including the willingness to attend treatment and access to health care, harm reduction, self-esteem, and mental health. The impact on treatment, unfortunately, stigmatized people's unwillingness to seek treatment results in higher economic, social, and medical costs. In the United States, costs associated with untreated substance use disorder, including those related to healthcare, criminal justice, and lost productivity at workplaces, amounted to a whopping $740 billion. The stigmatization of people with substance use disorders may be even more problematic in the current COVID-19 crisis. In addition to the greater risk through homelessness and drug use itself, legitimate fears around the virus may mean that bystanders or even first responders will be reluctant to administer naloxone or Narcan to people who have overdosed. There is also a danger that overtaxed hospitals will preferentially pass over those with obvious drug problems when making difficult decisions about where to direct life-saving personnel and resources. So becoming dependent on drugs can happen to anyone. Like I said, mine started because I had knee pain, essentially. It's important to keep in mind that we can all do a better job of decreasing stigma around drug use. A Recovery Brands survey had respondents provide written reflections about what they wished people in society at large understood about substance use disorder. Their responses help illustrate the importance of remaining kind, compassionate, and human. This image includes quotes from some of the respondents. So just because I was an addict doesn't make me a bad person. Deep down inside, we're all wonderful, loving people, usually pretty smart and creative too. It's not a matter of willpower, but a lack of moral compass or a lack of moral compass. Addiction is not the entirety of me. I am me. I'm not just my addiction. There's a lot of other stuff to love. And then I wish people saw the time that addicts spent alone, thinking about everything they've done, every time they've lied or stole. Just some thoughts from some folks that have substance use disorder. So some effective ways to help reduce stigma include offering a person compassionate support, displaying kindness to people in vulnerable situations, active listening while withholding judgment, seeing a person for who they are, not the drugs that they use, do your research on the disease and get educated about it. Treat people with drug dependency with dignity and respect. Avoid hurtful labels. Replace negative attitudes with evidence-based facts. Speak up when you see someone being mistreated. For additional information about stigma, you can go to www.samhsa.gov to access their power of perceptions and understanding changing how we deliver treatment and recovery services. SAMHSA has tremendous amount of resources on their website, including a treatment locator and just a lot of great information about peers and about the disease of substance use disorder. So I really, our stories have power. And I like to say, instead of, focusing on the overdose and drug crisis epidemic, let's start a recovery epidemic. And so, in the late 70s and early 80s, my life spiraled out of control. I destroyed 2 marriages. I left my career as a respiratory therapy clinical instructor because of my drug use. I was spiraling out of control. I was full of self-hatred. And I actually tried to kill myself by taking a bunch of pills that I washed down with vermouth. And it's someone that knew me from my time when I worked at the hospital, who was a person in recovery. And today she would be called a peer, but at the time she was a friend of mine, and she approached me and said, I know you're in trouble. Why don't you come to some meetings with me, and you don't have to keep living this way. And I chose to follow her into the rooms of recovery. And I went to treatment, and I came out, and I got really plugged into recovery. And since being in recovery, I've maintained gainful employment. I'm a homeowner, I'm a voter. I got my family back. I've gotten to experience so many dreams that I had as a child. And, I reconnected with my art. I'm I sold paintings and, you know, my art. There's a picture of me with one of my paintings. You know, I was able to care for my mother at the end of her life. She passed away from pancreatic cancer, and I was able to truly be there with her as she transitioned to, you know, to leaving Earth, to wherever people go after they die. But I had the privilege of taking care of her. And so I love my recovery. I love helping other people into recovery. And I'm just so thrilled to be able to, you know, to be in recovery. So language really matters. And so, you know, language is powerful, especially when talking about addictions. Stigmatizing language perpetuates negative perceptions. Person-first language focuses on the person, not the disorder. So when discussing the disease, say person with substance use disorder instead of addict, junkie, or druggie. Person living in recovery instead of ex-addict. Person arrested for drug violation instead of drug offender. Chooses not to use at this point instead of talking about that they're non-compliant or bombed out. Medication is a treatment tool instead of medication is a crutch. Had a setback instead of relapsed, or sometimes we just say return to use. Maintained recovery instead of staying clean. And a positive drug screen instead of a dirty drug screen. So say this instead of saying that. Don't say you're so selfish. Why don't you just stop? It's a brain disease. They can't typically just stop without an intervention. Say, I give up. You'll never beat this addiction. You're doing it all the wrong way. Recovery has to be done this way. There are multiple pathways to recovery. You can say you've changed, give concrete examples. Tell them I love you, I care about you. You're not alone. Everybody needs help at some point in their life. It's not your fault, it's a brain disease. Things can and will get better. And then how can I help you? These are some questions that you can ask to help break through somebody's denial about having substance use disorder. I'm not going to read all of them because we're running out of time, but things like, did you ever try to stop or cut down your drug or alcohol use but couldn't? Have you ever taken one drug to get over the effects of another? Does the thought of running out of drugs really scare you? And there's a lot more you can ask. And if you want this slide, we can make it in, we can send it to you after the session. So what can you do? Employers can have a strong drug-free workplace policy, do pre-employment drug screens, random drug screens after an accident, encouraging company-wide open and honest communication, employee assistance programs, the Marchman Act, and you can learn about treatment options. So regardless of the level of care, holistic treatment ensures all needs contributing to a person's substance use are addressed. For example, a well-developed treatment plan addresses the person's biological, psychological, spiritual, and social needs in one comprehensive approach. Engaging in 12-step self-help communities are encouraged as well. However, multiple pathways are readily available, embraced, and promoted by local recovery community organizations. When the I is replaced with we, even illness becomes wellness, and that was said by Malcolm X. So the recovery movement in Florida is growing. Our statewide recovery community organization, Floridians for Recovery, brings together the voices of recovery so that people know that a life of wellness from substance use disorder is possible. Recovery Community Organization is an independent nonprofit organization led and governed by representatives of local communities of recovery. These organizations organize recovery-focused policy advocacy activities, carry out recovery-focused community education and outreach programs, and or provide peer recovery support services. And you can go to www.floridiansforrecovery.org for more information. There's many, this is a slide showing many recovery community organizations throughout the state. Locally, you have the Volusia Recovery Alliance and Flagler Oars. So know that recovery is happening in both counties. So the Volusia Recovery Alliance is a grassroots not-for-profit education, advocacy, recovery community organization committed to furthering the message that recovery is possible for anyone who desires a life of wellness. We coordinate peer-driven services that provide substance use recovery resources. We exist to serve all those seeking recovery from the impact of addiction, including family, friends, and allies. We work to mobilize resources, reduce barriers, increase awareness and support in an effort to eliminate stigma and enhance recovery through multiple pathways. We link persons with substance use disorder, their loved ones and allies to resources that help sustain recovery. Volusia Recovery Alliance is a strong, committed, diverse network of allies and individuals in recovery who are actively engaged in efforts to eliminate stigma, build a vibrant recovery-ready community, represent the voice of recovery in those individuals impacted by substance use disorder, provide harm reduction via our New Chance Narcan Outreach Committee. And just so you know, VRA has distributed 1,198 Narcan kits this year with a report of 38 saved lives. We have trained 324 individuals and have held 63 trainings. We serve as a local Florida Department of Children and Families approved Narcan distributor. So if you need Narcan, and I must say one pill can kill if you're using street drugs, please call us at 386-77-PEER to get some Narcan and get trained on how to use it. Let's make Volusia County a recovery-friendly place to live, help us eliminate stigma, promote an understanding of substance use disorder as a chronic brain disease, and provide more recovery supports. And here's a snapshot of a lot of the activities that we have done in Volusia County. So you can share that there is hope, there's freedom, there's recovery, and there's a new way of life a day at a time. And I had the privilege to meet Dr. Murthy during the Obama administration and heard him say that the best medicine of all is love and compassion. So we have 3 minutes for questions. Sorry, I went a little over, but I'm done. Thank you for listening. And I appreciate being able to talk about a subject that I am very passionate about, and that is recovery from substance use disorder. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. At this time, you may raise your hand using the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. We'll then call on you and allow you to unmute yourself. We're going to alternate between questions answered in the chat and raised hands. So the first question that we had was from Ingrid. She's with OD2A Duval County. Is there a way for her to get high resolution brain scans? She needs it for messaging.
I can look into that. I'll put my email. If you would send me an email requesting that, that would be great. And I'll look into it.
Awesome. We also had Tori. I really appreciate the comparison of relapse rates for different diseases, Karen. It really helps to reduce stigma through deeper understanding. And then Whitney has her hand raised.
Hey, Karen, it's Whitney. Great presentation. Thank you so much. I did have a question though about reducing stigma within the recovery community, because I find that people in the community that are not in recovery and have stigma are more easily taught than I feel like people with lived experience. And so I was curious if you have any recommendations or suggestions of how to address people that are in recovery with, stigma that they might be having.
So a lot of it for me is being a power of example, because I am a person in long-term recovery and rather well known in some of the recovery community really trying to educate people on the fact of what goes on in the brain, I think is helpful. And just I prefer to do one-on-one conversation with people when I perceive or when I see somebody treating somebody with stigma. I try to provide experience, strength, and hope one-on-one. I think that works the best, given especially traditions that are involved in different, fellowships and that sort of thing. I think one-on-one education is the most effective in dealing with that, in my experience. Thank you for the question. And my email address, since here's the chat. I'll put my email address in the chat. And if you want anything past this presentation, please send me an email.
I do know that a lot of people in the chat did request a copy of the presentation and the PowerPoint slides.
Okay,
So maybe if they want to contact you through email to get that, that could be a good
probably
way
the
of doing
best.
that.
Yeah, because I'm not sure how we would globally do it.
Are there any other questions? All righty. Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing your expertise with us today. Thank you, everybody, for attending this session. Please use the link in the chat to complete the evaluation survey for this session. Thank you to the Florida State University for managing the summit evaluations. And please go to your summit program PDF or visit pathforhope.com/summit 2021 to click on the link for today's preliminary session at 12:40. I will go ahead and end the meeting now. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.